Hi, everybody. My name is Drew Bagby. I'm a librarian at Larimer Campus, Front Range Community College, Larimer Campus. And this is our second panel discussion of the morning. And we've got four very, very interesting and four folks that have been involved with OER pretty much, since I started doing this, it seems like. So we have Anne, and we've got Kay, we've got Kristie, and we got Bruce today to tell us about their experience with OER. And I will say one good thing about this panel, especially because Kay's here. Kay has a little bit of a different approach to OER because she has a different title. She's not necessarily an instructor. So it's a really interesting panel and a group of people here today to tell us about their OER experience. So we'll go ahead and get started here. And first thing I'm going to do is just have each of our panelists introduce themselves and then tell us about what they're doing with OER currently and their, just initial thoughts on OER. So Anne, let's start with you today.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Anne Riedel. I am at the Westminster campus and I teach biology. And that's a challenge, adopting a textbook in a course, in a big science course like that. It's also very important because those textbooks are ridiculously expensive, like in the range of $220 for a textbook. And when I surveyed my students years ago, I found out that the thing that they used the least and liked the least in the course was the textbook. So they were paying the most money for the thing they liked the least. So probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I started to adopt OER resources and ultimately adopted an open source textbook, but I didn't like it very much. It wasn't written well. There weren't enough pictures in it. So I rewrote it just to get the wording the way I liked it. And then I about tripled the number of figures. And I like it better now. But it was a lot of work up front, but now I'm saving work because I'm not on that cycle with the publisher where I have to change the book every 3 years.
Excellent. And Kristie, how's it going? Good to see you. Let's hear about your experience with OER.
Yes, I teach online primarily now, but you'll also find me at the Larimer campus. I do some work there and I have taught there as well. I teach world, regional geography and physical geography. And the course I have made OER is world regional geography. I didn't develop a textbook or anything like that, but I pulled from many different OER sources to develop what I call quests within the quiz tool. And we'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
Cool. And let's hear from Bruce. Go ahead, Bruce.
Hi, I'm Bruce Nye. I'm full-time faculty at the Westminster campus, and my OER project was last year I built a modern China class for online, and the biggest problem I had with textbooks was the bias that was there. Modern China's a very hot topic right now for all the wrong reasons when you're a historian, and so there's a lot of bias that's out there, and so I wanted to try something different. So we'll talk more later about how that worked out, but that was my biggest issue, was just trying to present a topic to students that didn't know very much about modern China without the Western or the good versus us versus them, good versus evil kind of biases that can come with looking at the modern Chinese state.
Excellent. Thanks, Bruce. And then Kay, let's hear about your experiences with OER as an FRCC personnel.
I thought you almost said personality, and that's why I laughed so hard. Okay, no. So I'm Kay Novak. I'm the Assistant Director of Learning Design and Online Learning, and I take and so I don't focus on one course. I take a broader look at it and what we're actually doing. And I have this written to my goals this year, and I'm so happy about it. Is how do we create an equity-minded framework for evaluating OER? Because, and thanks Bruce for giving me a great segue, because yes, when we're looking at OER material, the fact that it's free is great. The fact that a lot of people have done content, but often looks at a very dominant culture viewpoint. And it often comes with a lot of, as Bruce said, biases. And because of that, we're looking at OER now and developing our own evaluation so that anybody can use it. So we're in the process of that right now.
Excellent. And yeah, Kay, especially today, because our keynotes, if you were here for the keynote speakers, they were focusing on EDI. So it's nice to have a person that is looking at equity and diversity and inclusion within OER materials on Front Range's campus. So thanks Kay, for taking on that challenge. I'm sure it's vast, and we'll hear more about that in a little bit. Okay, so the next question I have for our panelists is really just focused on what led them to want to create OER materials or be involved with OER creation here at FRCC. So, and I'm going to start with Kristie, because we've done this panel before, and she mentioned that she has created a unique OER object called quests. And we'd like to hear more about those as well. So Kristie, if you want to tell us what led you to want to create OER materials.
So same reason as many people, the textbooks didn't really have everything I was quite looking for. So I was pulling from so many different sources to get the course that I wanted. And, you know, the textbooks were being updated every few years and things were changing, and that was great, but it's still, I was pulling from so many different avenues. So the textbooks was just a small piece of it, but yet my students are paying that cost. So my quest I designed, which is the bulk of the learning. I mean, they have like an introductory exploration, I call it, where they kind of go through like a mini lecture. These are for my online courses, by the way. But my quest is all built in the quiz tool, and it's designed so there's right to learns, active learning, and the student works through these quests, and there'll be maybe like a snippet of information pulled from an OER textbook, and you know, they'll have to answer some questions, and then there'll be some maps pulled from somewhere else that's OER that they have to analyze and answer questions, and then there'll be maybe like a video that they have to do a right to learn based on. So based on like maps, charts, images, I have image explosions too that they write about. Different OER texts or just articles that I found. They go through this active learning process where they walk through this own journey themselves, learning about that particular section in World Regional Geography. And I have had very positive feedback. The students love it. They realize it's a lot of work. But you know, I've also at the front been very honest and said, you know, this is kind of the bulk, so it should be a lot of work. And it should be very time consuming, but they feel like the retention is really good and that they, you know, did accomplish everything that they're hoping for. So I think it's been a good result in the end.
And I think there's a question in the chat, and I think this is for you, Kristie. It's what courses do you teach again? And it was geography, right?
World Regional Geography and Physical Geography are the two I'm teaching right now.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
And so, Bruce, what led you to want to be involved with the OER materials for your students?
Did you ask me? Because I lost it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did it cut out there on you?
Yeah, that was my fault. I'm just FYI, I'm at the Dove House today, which is in Lafayette. It's our Roadmap to Achievement Day, and I'm the co-chair for Roadmap. Mm-hmm. So internet here's a little sketchy. I think we've got some snowflakes. We've got some snowflakes coming too, Drew. So
right.
Anyway, so yeah, anyway, great to be here. So for me, like I said, last year, I was asked to build a brand new course for online learning in history, modern China, which is 1644 to the present day. And, you know, whenever you build a course from the ground up, this is a course we've never taught before. In fact, it's not been taught in the system before. So whenever you build from ground up, you get an opportunity to kind of really think about how you want this to work. And I'd always been interested in OER. as sources. And as I mentioned already about the bias that's out there in the textbooks for China and modern China classes, I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of build a course around OER and vice versa. So that's what I did. And it's worked out. It actually worked out really well. I taught the course in the fall, and it went really well. And I was excited to be able to use material from all over the place and different types of material, other than just a standard textbook. And so that was good. I ended up writing a partial textbook that kind of married into existing OER material. So I would take things from different places and then fill in the gaps, or maybe do a better job of explaining things for the audience that we have here at Front Range, mostly, first or second year students who knew nothing about China. Kristie, I don't think they could even find it on a map, frankly, but
we might have lost Bruce's feed there. Let's see. Yeah, I think we did. Okay, well, we'll wait for Bruce to come back, and then in the meantime, maybe Kay, can you speak to what led you to want to use OER or participate in OER materials and looking at their EDI and all that good stuff?
Sorry, I'm muted. I'm going to screen share. and just because I'm going to be flipping around. That's why I won't do the full slides. So I'm just trying to give people a bit of a flavor. Okay. The slide you see here is taco night. Okay. And the reason I wanted to look at EDI, or, some people are now saying, you'll like this, JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The reason why I was interested in this is because I got put on I was put on a project for culturally relevant pedagogy, and to do OER for culturally relevant pedagogy. And there's this real infamous essay out there, and you can Google it. It's called Taco Night, and we call it Taco Tuesdays a lot. But what it is about just like this, somebody when they're trying to bring in something, just putting this light flavor of the students, like a sprinkle, like a taco night and calling it multiculturalism, a taco night and calling it diversity, just putting this sprinkling on and going, oh yeah, we have cultural diversity. And so what I went from was looking for that, that recommendation where somebody just gives me one piece. Oh, this is the best OER ever, just use this. And instead critically looking at how our students aren't just we're just giving them a sprinkling of their culture, but instead, and I'll switch it over, is looking for students' rightful presence in the material that we have. So when you're asking me about this, the reason I'm sticking to those two slides where I'm looking to go from that taco night, that sprinkling of multiculturalism, to really looking for OER that gives our students that rightful presence in that material. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'll stop there. I could talk to you for 3 hours on this.
Excellent. Yeah, my computer almost froze up there. Thanks, Kay. Yeah, it's I find Kay's I don't know, place in this OER web that we have here at Front Range to be interesting and obviously very important. The folks this morning that did our keynote, talked about how EDI or JEDI, I like that, I'm going to start using that, is sort of a big buzzword or a big buzz, acronym these days. And I think that Front Range does seem to be trying to really focus on creating things that are not excluding certain members of our society, and making them feel like they're represented, and And I'm from Eastern Kentucky, where it's not a very diverse population. And so it's a nice thing to see when you come to different places in the world and see that people are actually trying to incorporate others into their learning objectives. So thanks, Kay, for showing us that. The next question sort of focuses on the challenges that you've faced when you're creating your OER materials, or in Kay's experience, the challenges of dealing with OER and I'm going to start using it, JEDI issues. So whoever wants to speak to some of their challenges that they've dealt with when creating their OER materials, they can go ahead and start. And Bruce is back. So Bruce, if you want to add anything about what led you to OER materials as well, you can go ahead. But let's start with Bruce. Getting back in the fray here.
Yeah, because who knows how long this is going to last, right? I think I don't know where it cut out, honestly. I just kept talking, much like class. My students are sound asleep and I'm still going. But again, it was mainly just the bias issue of what was out there, and then just lack of decent material is really what led me to OER. And then the platform, the opportunity to do it. What I found is my biggest struggles was I've mentioned this. This is the first thing I usually tell anybody that comes to me and says, hey, what about OER? Plan time and then triple it and then double that. And you may be close to about what you need as far as the time frame goes to do this. It is not something that you're going to just jump into and be quick about. If you're going to do it right, and if you're going to do it well, it takes a lot of time. It really does. But the rewards of that are so worth it. It is so worthwhile in doing that. And the other thing is, I had this vision of what OER should be and how it should look in our D2L shells and in an online class. And I started, and it didn't look anything like what I thought it should look like. And so we have amazing instructional design people. I worked particularly with Eric Schimmer, and he was amazing. And just like talk about Jedi stuff. He was like a magician Jedi. It was just amazing the things he was able to do and put my vision of what it should be into the course, where it kind of looked and felt and worked the way I hoped it would. And because I'm not really a tech guru savvy kind of person when it comes to that stuff. I'm more content driven. So that was amazing. It helped me get through a lot of roadblocks and a lot of stumbling blocks with OER. Was working with him, and just be open-minded too. That's the other thing is I found that when I first started, my vision was too narrow and I needed to expand it for the course. And so, when I first started thinking OER for this class, I was thinking textbook, like replacing a textbook. But what I ended up with was so much richer and so much more in depth. I had not only this textbook design that I had developed, but we had some geography stuff that we went out and did. We had some film clippage stuff that we brought in, and music concert stuff that we brought in, some cultural experiences, some language experiences, some ethnicity experiences with China. And then that was just before we even got to Mao and the communist world. And then, of course, that brings in a whole new way you can look at things. And so just, it's really limited by your own imagination as to how you want to use OER and what you want to do with it.
Excellent. Thanks, Bruce. And Anne, any challenges that you'd like to speak to?
Yeah, unlike I think most of you, I actually developed OER first for face-to-face course, and then was able to transition it into an online course. And I mean, the reason I developed it was because I was fully flipping my course to make it fully active learning, and I needed work for the students to do before they came into class. And so I developed, kind of sounds similar to what Kristie did, where I developed H5P modules, which have videos and some text and some quiz questions and different ways for the students to interact with the material before they came to class. And then, when they came to class, they could do the activities and sort of interact with the material on a deeper level. So I guess the challenge, again, like Bruce was saying, it's not just about making textbooks, right? It's also about making other materials for the students to use to interact, either online with we have Google Slide activities where they can move things around, or in class where they can do things up on a whiteboard or on with manipulatives in class. I agree completely with Bruce that you're limited only by your own imagination. I mean, you can bring OER in physical ways and in all kinds of ways, virtual ways. It's more than just writing a textbook. It's more than just changing from a publisher textbook to your textbook. It's also bringing in a lot of other materials that make the experience a lot richer for students. But the challenge then is finding all of that stuff or creating all of that stuff. And I think, Bruce, you missed a double there. I think you should double the time one more time, because it is extremely time intensive. So I do encourage two things. One is get a grant. The CCCS has OER grants, and you should definitely get one to pay yourself for some of that time. And then secondly, find collaborators. The more people you have looking for information, people that teach a same or similar course, whether it's at Front Range or somewhere else, you can double the amount of things you can find if you have two people looking instead of one.
Cool, thank you, Anne. And then Kristie, any challenges?
I will definitely back what they said about time. It's a lot of time, but don't be discouraged. I used instructional design team too, and that definitely helps. You're not going to go out and write a textbook or do anything like this, like in a company on your own. It takes a team, and you have to remember. So ask for help, even if it's just the technical piece, if you're doing online, or even if you're not doing online, just putting things together. That's primarily where I had help, was just kind of putting the pieces together, and it helped make it better. But don't be discouraged on the time. The reward is well worth it, because then you have a class exactly how you want it in the end. There was a question about the quality of OER materials. Yes, there are sometimes issues with quality. However, there's also some great stuff. I mean, that's just like textbook. You're never happy with the entire textbook. You gotta sift through all the material and see what you want and what you don't. But there's a lot of great material out there, especially for geography, I found, and a lot of other subjects as well when I was coming across it. One kind of issue, a lot of the textbooks have the supplemental material information, labs kind of things. That's something that you're going to have to piece together. But once again, like for my physical geography courses, I never loved the labs that came with the textbook, so I always did my own anyways, like OER courses. So yeah, I mean, I think us as instructors never follow a textbook front to back anyway. So same out in the OER world.
Excellent. Thanks, Kristie, for answering that question. I was gonna get to that one, but if anybody else wants to jump in right now about the issues you might face when you are dealing with other OER materials, feel free. And then we can also talk to Kay about challenges that she might see when she's doing her searching and research for OER materials. So.
Okay, I'll go ahead and I'll screen share again. Okay, so I'm pulling this up. I didn't take each of these pictures, but I will say when it comes to OER, just especially because of the lens that I'm taking, that rightful presence lens, and I have Kat here, and now knowing that Jonathan took that bluebird picture, what I would say for your subject matter to supplement the OER, have your phone out all the time and take whatever pictures you need to take along the way. Like I said, the mural from George Floyd is not mine, but the other ones, I went downtown to Denver. These are all Denver murals. I went downtown so we could find something that could represent our students, and especially the one in the corner. This was during the pandemic when you weren't supposed to be by anybody. So went downtown, waited till nobody else was around, ran up, grabbed that picture so that there could be representation for our students. And yeah, my suggestion is always have your camera up and always have your eye open to see what is out there. It doesn't have to be a full textbook that you're going to this approved OER site. It might be a blog post that's really insightful. It might be an article that you find that students have access to. So I'd say expand your viewpoint when it comes to OER, that it's not just things that have an approved OER wrapper on them, things that are publicly available for students, things that you can do quickly. And here's a quick question. Has anybody here heard the term open pedagogy before? And if you've heard it, just type Y in the chat, or if you haven't heard of it, just type N in the chat. I just do this with my students to see how engaged they are. And Drew is really engaged. Okay, so what open pedagogy is, now think about this. Open pedagogy is the concept of, and there's a buzz phrase to it, killing the disposable assignment. So what open pedagogy is that when you have your students work on something, and you use the material or the assignments or whatever the final project was, or maybe it's just pictures, you use it in your next course. And that's what open pedagogy is considered. You're teaching your students are creating something, they've done something well, and you go, I'm going to use this in my next course. This could be a glossary of terms. This could be a bibliography. This could be having them run around and find these pictures. But open pedagogy is the idea is that your students are co-creators in OER that you'll then be using. Of course, you get the students' permission. If you're going to use an essay that was written or an assignment or anything like that. But the idea is, I would say the challenge is it is narrow, and sometimes you only have one option. Maybe there's only one decent option. So the challenge is looking for more and thinking outside of having something already prepackaged for you. And based on what I was hearing from Bruce, it sounded like he kind of went with that. So thanks.
Thank you, Kay. Yeah, again, very interesting. And I'm glad you mentioned the open pedagogy, because I think that is going to be the answer for these like EDI questions going forward. Because if you have students that are a diverse population helping you create your OER material, they're going to, interject a person or ideas that might be relevant to their cultural experience and might not be as known to someone like myself. So I think that open pedagogy is a really great way to create your OER materials and really involve your students too. I think that that's a really good way to get folks really engaged in these OER creations. Let me see here. Any other questions? Okay, so I think Kay, you answered that. Are there permission issues with open pedagogy for using student work? And that's pretty much getting their permission, right? So cool. And all right, so the next thing actually kind of deals with, the next question is about students. And it's really about how are your students responding to your OER materials in your course? I know Bruce talked in the last panel about how he only had one student that dropped because they didn't have a textbook. So that's so I'm interested to see or hear about how students react to the different types of OER materials you're presenting them. So whoever wants to go first, let's start with Bruce. I already kind of mentioned yours, so.
No worries. I had that example where When I ran this class in the fall, I did have one student that was very concerned that there wasn't a tangible textbook that she could, hold and carry to, the coffee shop and do everything with, I guess. But, and she did end up dropping, and that was the reason she mentioned she dropped, is she wasn't comfortable with the OER concept. And, when did we do this last time, Drew? Was it November? Yeah, November when we did one of these. One of the other things I mentioned was I've noticed also that there's been a little bit of pushback from older students who maybe are just not as tech savvy, but there's really nothing with OER that's scary, or that they don't, if they can move a mouse, they can do it. If they can point and click, they can handle this. And in fact, with my class in the fall, for their midterm, we did kind of an oral exam where we met one-on-one on Zoom. And I spent the first 15 minutes with each of them talking about the class and what they thought was working and not working. And then what did they think about the OER aspect of it? And every single one of them, liked it. By the midterm, they were into the swing of it. They understood how it worked. They liked the options with it. They liked that it's free. They liked just all the different things that we were doing that makes it a little bit more difficult to do in a traditional course that's using traditional textbooks or sources or things like that. So that was a positive thing, definitely.
Excellent. And Kristie, how are students responding to your OER objects, your requests or request? Yeah.
So I do put my resources, the main OER, I use two main OER textbooks that I reference throughout my quest. And I do link those and say, hey, there's one primarily, we're going to use portions of it. Feel free to read it more if you want, use a whole book. And I think that kind of gives them a little bit of comfort that they have that book to read if they want to. However, as you all know, there's very few students who read the whole textbook. I usually have one student question if they can get a hard copy. And, they can't really unless they want to print it off. But I also tell them, this is just a small portion of what we're accessing. I think they're all good with it. I haven't had any complaints about it. I think once they get in and do the first quest, then they're like, oh, I get it. There is this textbook, and I say, there are these OER textbooks. If you want to read more and dig deeper, go ahead. But and I don't know. I think that puts them at ease.
Yeah, no, it is interesting how even what I would consider modern students still, several of them still want a hard copy print textbook. And in some cases I can see how that's an advantage, but going forward, I think that our population is geared up for using technology to learn more in the, going forward. So especially since we've been last 2 years doing things like this, meeting in virtual spaces. So
Drew, one more comment too I want to just make on that real quick is the initial comment where they want the hard textbook, which I get. I like to read a book versus a Kindle. So I'm one of those that if I'm going to sit down and read a book, I want the hard copy. But the ones who were asked about hard copy, they're like, oh, wait, never mind. It's so much better because when I'm going through the quest, they can go in the text and do a search. There's a lot of benefits for electronic when you're taking a class, and I think they see that once they dig in and they're like, oh, this system's better. So sorry, just wanted to add that too.
No, that's a great comment because the added advantage of being able to search through a textbook instead of having to go to the index, look up the word that you're looking for, find a synonymous term. Yeah, I would imagine that most students, once they figure that little shortcut out, would be much happier with an electronic textbook. And I too, I'm a librarian, so obviously I like books. And so it's something that I've had to get used to, but I'm also on board with ebooks and e-textbooks. So good on you for doing all that. And then Anne, any responses from your students?
I was really concerned about that because, you know, we get big, glossy, beautiful textbooks for $220, right? And so I kept on, I surveyed my students before and found out they didn't like the textbooks very much, and then, or they didn't use it very much. And then I kept surveying them, and I've only had one student over several years say, no, I'd rather have a big, fancy, expensive textbook. One advantage that I have in my face-to-face class, I actually give them a black and white print copy because I can print that off. So, I mean, it's ugly, but it's you know, it's black and white. And then I give them the online, they have the full color copy. So I tell them, if you want to see a figure, look on the online. One of the big advantages too is I divided all my textbook up into chapters. So in each week, they just have one chapter to look at, which means they don't have this giant book that they have to search through. But still, most of my students don't use the textbook as much as they use other resources. So I'm glad to know that they're not paying a lot of money for something they're not using all that much.
Excellent. Yeah, I like the fact that you poll the students too. That's a really good idea. And one over several years, just wanting a fancy textbook, that's a pretty good rate. And then finally, we'll get to Kay. Kay, do you get any responses from students or faculty about?
Oh, okay, well, I'll put on my instructor hat. Okay,
Cool.
I teach in MGD and CIS, and the CIS courses I teach totally OER, but they're technology courses, so I don't have students asking for paper, you know. And because they're technology courses, I really have to emphasize the fact that you will have to go to things like GitHub and OpenStack and to find answers to questions and things like that. And constantly, you really have to use your digital and information literacy. So not so that, but I will tell you something that I've done with more like open pedagogy. It's a very small thing, but in my discussions, what I'm having them do that I'm then using as open pedagogy, they know there are text discussions just because things are set up that way with our platforms. But in every one of them, they have to bring in a picture or embed a YouTube video. So they're collecting resources for me every time they're doing a discussion. So on the rubric, to further the conversation with their fellow students, they always have to either include an image or an embedded YouTube video. And so the whole class then vets that YouTube video or that image, because the students really like talking in discussions about what they liked about whatever that image was that they brought in or the YouTube video. So for me, they're helping vet this for me.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a interesting way of creating your OER course. That's neat. And obviously for a technology course, yeah, you're right. Like, it would be silly if they were like, hey, I need a print book. It seems odd. All right, we've got about 7 minutes left here. And I usually ask the panelists, if they have any advice for our participants today. But really, I want to go ahead and just open up the floor to any of the folks out there that have questions themselves. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can put your question in the chat, we can go from there. And if we don't get any questions, we can always ask the advice question, because people already answered some of that. My advice to you as folks that are interested in OER is to look into the OER grants that FRCC provides. And then I think someone was mentioning earlier that it is an overwhelming feeling to do OER and like get involved with it. So one of the best pieces of advice that I've heard, and it was from these panels, was, just start, get yourself moving. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, and, do one unit at a time, or do one assignment at a time, and don't try, Bruce actually in the last panel had a really good, he had a good point about how he tried to do too much, he thought, at first. So Bruce, you want to tell him about your experience with starting your OER?
Yeah, sure. So as I was mentioning, since I'm building this brand new class, I had this brilliant idea that I'll do everything OER with it. And having never done OER before, I kind of just jumped into the deep end. And there were a lot of learning curves that it took. And, you know, me building the course began last spring. I had my grant last spring. I finished the course the last day of class in December. Just to give you an idea how long it took me to do this. I mean, I was like, those last couple of units, I was one day ahead of the students in trying to get everything done. So I would, if you want to do it, if that's how you operate the best, great, go for it. But you may want to start with a smaller bite, maybe a unit, a project, one particular, teaching module, however you design your stuff, and just kind of get a feel for OER and how it works. The other thing I was going to mention earlier, people have been doing OER a lot longer than we've been calling it OER. And it is out there. It's all over the web. It's just, we just don't recognize it necessarily as OER. And so there is a ton of stuff out there that people have already done. And my guess is there's stuff in almost all of our disciplines and the things that we'd like to do. It's just a question of taking time to go look at it. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to relearn how to do all these different things. It's out there, and there may be better ways to do it. But the big thing is you just got to get in, and you just got to, it's that Dory line, right? You just got to start swimming and just keep swimming and just keep swimming.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that line. I have a 3-year-old that loves Dory. So there's a question, and I think Kay just answered it with a list, actually. So is there a certain data place you like to look for OER materials? And is that what that list is, Kay? Various OER?
Yeah, it's just my list. Okay,
Cool.
There's better lists, and the panelists can give you more specifics. This is just one that I put together. So it's going to have a lot of what my interests are. So, talking to Anne about her biology, or the other panelists about specific subject areas, you should go there if you want specific subject.
Cool. Any other panelists want to provide us their OER go-to for finding materials? And if you don't have it, it's fine. Not a problem.
There's one I like, and I don't know if it's on this, but there's a site called Teachers Pay Teachers. And a lot of the stuff on there you have to pay for, which I don't like to do. I don't do, but there is also, you can set the filter to free, and there's also a lot of free resources, and you can search by level, subject, and there's, I don't know, a million things on there.
Excellent. Yeah, I typically use, the big, the really popular ones like Merlot, OER Commons. You can actually, there are a lot of really interesting LibGuides that various colleges and universities have created dedicated to OER. And I think, maybe it's Iowa, University of Iowa. I think someone has published a OER guidebook, or like a handbook, if you're looking to get into the mechanics of creating your OER. So really, as a librarian, it seems like blasphemy for me to say this, but Googling OER materials is one way to see what's out there. So you can always try that too. Looks like we got a minute left. So thanks for the panelists. Thanks to the panelists for coming today. And thanks for everyone that came to listen to our discussion. I hope you gained some valuable information, and I hope you're ready to go out there and try out OER materials. So on the behalf of our panelists, thanks for coming today. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, drew.bagby@frontrange.edu. And we'll see you next time.